Okay, so you've got it. The big idea, that lightning bolt moment.
Yeah,
And you found your people, the team you really trust to build this thing. There's that buzz, right? That feeling you're onto something huge.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Starting a company is, it's an incredible feeling. That initial energy is just vital.
It really is. But, right there in those early, exciting days, you hit this critical decision, one that can either make or break the partnership down the line.
How to split the equity. That's the one. Who gets what piece of this thing you're building?
And the easy answer, the one that feels simplest, is just get it done, right? Quick handshake.
Yeah, maybe 50-50 if it's two founders.
Or assign a fixed chunk to that first crucial hire. Our sources call this the quick handshake or a fixed split. Feels like you ticked a box.
It seems easy.
Hmm.
On the surface, yeah. But the research we looked at, including these studies on startup dynamics, it paints a really clear picture. This is often the most dangerous path you can take.
Hazardous, really.
Why? Because it plants these seeds of unfairness almost immediately, and they will cause problems later. It's almost guaranteed.
And we're not talking small disagreements. The sources mention big examples, like Zipcar's founder having years of angst over an early split.
Right, and the Facebook story, those massive, costly legal fights, these things can seriously wound, even kill a young company.
Totally devastating. Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. We're digging into the source material of this research, and specifically a framework called slicing pie.
Exactly. We want to understand why those fixed splits fail so often, and then explore this dynamic alternative that's really designed for fairness, especially in that messy, unpredictable early stage.
Right. The goal is to pull out the key insights, the nuggets that can help you, the listener, potentially avoid those huge team blowups, build something where people feel they actually get what they deserve for what they put in.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so the core issue you mentioned with the fixed split, it's agreeing on percentages way too early, right? Based on guesses.
Totally. It's like trying to pay someone their entire annual salary on their first day of work based on the interview. You're locking in a permanent decision based on predictions.
And that's the fundamental weakness.
That's the killer flaw, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A fixed split stops being fair the second anything changes. And what's the one constant in a startup?
Change. Always.
Exactly. Roles shift, commitment levels change, maybe funding doesn't come through, or a key person leaves, or you need to bring someone new in. The original agreement just gets completely out of whack with reality fast.
Which leads to what the sources call the alligator pit. I like that visual.
It's vivid, isn't it? When the split feels unfair, you're forced into these awful renegotiations. They're just dripping with fear, mistrust. Everyone's looking out for themselves. It destroys trust.
Sounds brutal. And the sources give concrete examples of how this happens.
Oh, yeah, plenty. Like Frank, the marketing guy, and Tom, the developer, they start 50-50. Simple.
Seems
Until they need another key developer. They need to offer, say, 10%. Okay, where does that 10% come from? Does Tom give it up? Does Frank? They both chip in? Who decides? Instant fight.
okay, yeah, I see that.
Or Jill, the developer, she gets 60%. She works her tail off full-time for a year, building the core product. Joe, the marketing guy, got 40% for putting in maybe $5,000 early on and making some promises.
But then Joe gets busy.
Yeah, moves on to other things, barely contributes, product's ready, but Joe still expects his full 40% of everything. Jill feels totally ripped off. She did all the heavy lifting. Another fight brewing.
Right, what else?
How about vesting? Len hires Miles, promises him 25% vesting over a year. A week before Miles hits that first cliff, Len fires him. Maybe for a weak reason, maybe just to keep the equity.
Oh, that's rough.
Miles feels cheated,
Hmm.
probably ends up in court. The slicing pie model we'll discuss, it has ways to prevent Len from benefiting like that.
Okay.
Or Cindy, she's hustling, raising funds, puts in 40K of her own money. She hires Ron, the tech guy, for 35% equity to build the app. Ron finishes it, but then demands more cash, more equity, basically holds the app hostage. Cindy's equity is worthless without it, but giving in feels like blackmail. A different model could have tied Ron's reward structure to actual delivery and contribution differently.
Got it.
Even success can cause problems. John and Milton, 50-50 partners. Business is profitable. Great. Then Milton tragically dies. His wife inherits his 50%.
Okay.
Now John is doing literally all the work, generating all the profit. Does he really owe half of that ongoing profit to someone who isn't contributing at all? It's legally complex, ethically messy.
Yeah.
Another fight waiting to happen. Slicing pie actually has mechanisms for transitions like that.
Wow.
And the simplest one, you and I agree 50-50. You bust your gut doing everything, I kick back and do nothing, but I still own half.
Yeah.
That's just fundamentally unfair.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fight waiting to happen.
So all these situations, they show how fixed splits create these imbalances. Some people feel they're putting in way more than they're getting the less than alligators. Others are getting more than they arguably deserve the greater than alligators.
And that imbalance just eats away at the team.
It completely erodes trust. It can absolutely sink the ship before you even get out of the harbor.
Okay, so this alternative, slicing pie, it's designed to avoid that pit entirely because it's dynamic.
Exactly. That's the term they use. Dynamic or sometimes organic. It's specifically built for that early bootstrapped phase, before you hit break even, before you get major outside funding like a Series A.
Right, the really uncertain bit. So if it's dynamic, it changes. What's the guiding idea? How does it stay fair?
The core principle is actually pretty simple. Your percentage share of the rewards, whatever comes out in the end, profit or a sale, should always match your percentage share of the risk taken to get those rewards.
Risk meaning the stuff you put in without getting paid cash for it, your time, your money, maybe equipment you lent.
Precisely. Those unpaid contributions, those are your bets on the company's success. And the amount of that bet, the risk, is measured by the fair market value of whatever you put in.
Fair market value, like what you normally charge for that time or service.
Exactly. What would the company have had to pay on the open market
Right.
to get that same thing if it had the cash?
Okay, so it's like that blackjack analogy they used. If we pool our money, I put in $1, you put in $3, that's $4, total risk.
Right.
If we win, say, $8, it wouldn't be fair to split it 4 and 4. You risked 3 out of the $4, 75%. So you should get $6, 75% of the winnings. I risked $1, 25%, so I get $2.
That nails it. Your share of the reward mirrors your share of the risk. In slicing pie, your equity slice reflects your share of all the bets placed so far.
And because people are always making new bets, working more hours, paying for stuff.
Exactly. Every day brings new contributions, new bets. So the equity split calculation is constantly updated. It changes dynamically to show the current picture of who's risked what.
And the research suggests this actually works better. Companies using these dynamic models do better.
That's what the findings indicate, yeah. Because they have a built-in way to handle change fairly. They avoid that whole fix and fight disaster scenario.
Yeah. Okay, I'm starting to see the logic. So how does it work mechanically? How do you quantify these bets? The sources talk about slices and fair market value plus a multiplier, part of an allocation framework.
Right. Let's break down the allocation part first, how you figure out how many slices each contribution is worth. You take the fair market value of the contribution.
What it's worth on the open market.
Yep. And you multiply it by a risk multiplier.
Mm.
The sources argue this is way more practical than trying to guess everyone's future value, which is where fixed splits go wrong.
Okay, fair market value. They used the magic ATM card idea, right? If you had this magic card, how much cash would you need to withdraw to pay for that specific contribution?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. What's the real market rate for that person's time or that server or that cash injection? You assign a real-world value even if the startup can't pay it yet.
And the multiplier, what's that for?
It does two main things. First, it adjusts for the difference between putting in cash versus non-cash things like time. Cash is often harder for people to risk personally. Second, it acts as a lever for consequences if someone leaves the company, which we'll get to in the recovery framework. Basically, it rewards taking the risk of contributing without immediate cash payment.
And the specific multipliers mentioned were 4x for cash and 2x for non-cash, right?
That's correct. 4 times for cash contributions, 2 times for non-cash like time or used equipment.
So the basic formula is something like slices morgios, fair market value, any cash paid x multiplier.
Exactly. If the company does manage to pay you some cash for your contribution, maybe a partial salary, that cash payment reduces the amount you were risking. So it reduces the slices you get for that contribution. If you get paid 100% cash, you took no risk, so you get 0 slices for it.
Makes sense. You only get slices for the part you didn't get paid for. Okay, let's walk through the main types of contributions. Time. This is usually the big one, right? Hours worked.
For sure. The FMV is your hours worked times your appropriate hourly rate. And that hourly rate comes from your fair market value annual salary divided by 2,000 hours.
So you need to agree on everyone's FMV salary first.
Yes. And then track your hours. The sources admit, yeah, tracking time isn't always popular, but it's crucial for fairness. Plus, it gives you amazing insights into where effort is going, helps with management, and provides solid backup for investors later. It actually discourages wasting time because it's visible.
And it matters if you're full-time versus part-time. overtime.
Absolutely. The hours are the hours. If you work overtime and don't get paid cash for it, those extra hours generate slices too, at the 2x non-cash multiplier.
Okay, next up, cash. Putting your own money in.
Simple one. If you spend your personal cash for the company, like buying supplies, and you don't get reimbursed, the FMV is the amount you spend. That converts to slices at the 4x cash multiplier. So a dollar spent gets you 4 slices. More bang for your buck because cash is king and often harder risk to take.
But what if you just deposit, say, $10,000 into the company bank account? Do you get 40,000 slices right away?
Ah, good question. No, not immediately. Cash sitting in the bank isn't really consumed risk yet. This is where the well concept comes in.
The well.
Yeah, think of it as a designated holding account for cash contributions from founders, maybe friends and family. People contribute to the well. Slices are only given out to the well owners proportionally to their contribution to the well when the company draws money out of the well and actually spends it.
Ah, so the slices are generated as the cash is used.
Exactly. And those slices are generated at the higher 4x cash multiplier for the well owners. This does 2 clever things.
Yeah.
It stops a big early cash dump from totally skewing the pie unfairly before the work even starts, and it makes the managers really careful about spending that well money because they know every dollar spent creates 4 relatively expensive slices for the investors in the well.
So it aligns incentives for smart spending, like managing a loan.
Pretty much.
Mhm.
It functions like a loan agreement where slice allocation is the repayment as principal is used.
Okay. What about unreimbursed expenses, like paying for software on your personal card?
Yep. If it's a legitimate business expense you pay for personally and the company doesn't pay you back, the FMV is the amount you paid, and that gets the 4x cash multiplier. Needs receipts, of course, and it's for actual business costs, not your daily commute or lunch.
Got it. Personal loans or credit cards? If you take out debt for the company?
Okay, if you personally take out a loan or use your card and you make the payments for company expenses, then the money you spend generates slices for you at the 4x cash rate as you spend it. But if the company starts making the payments on that personal debt you took out, then you stop getting slices for it. The company is covering the risk now.
What if the company misses a payment on my personal loan?
Then the amount of that missed payment converts to slices for you at the 4x rate. Because now you're on the hook personally again because the company failed to pay.
Okay, that makes sense. What about physical things, supplies or equipment, like my laptop?
If you buy new stuff specifically for the company and aren't reimbursed, it's like cash. Purchase price times the 4x multiplier. If you contribute something you already owned, pre-owned equipment, the FMV depends on its age. If it's less than a year old, maybe use the price paid. Older, use the current resale value. And those pre-owned items convert at the 2x non-cash multiplier.
And the company owns it then?
Yep. Once slices are given, the asset belongs to the company.
Mm.
And generally, your standard personal laptop or phone you'd use anyway, those usually aren't included unless it's like a dedicated work machine bought specifically.
Yeah. Okay, this is detailed, but it feels like it covers most tangible inputs. What about intangibles, like ideas? It was my idea problem.
Yeah, the sources are pretty strict on this. An idea only gets slices if it directly generates measurable revenue and results in protectable IP like a patent or copyright that isn't just part of your normal job. If it does, the FMV might be calculated like a royalty, maybe 5–10% of the revenue from that specific idea. Just having the initial concept or ideas that come up as part of your work, no separate slices for those.
That clarifies things. And relationships, bringing in customers, investors.
Relationships count when they deliver concrete value. Customers. Maybe you get slices equivalent to a sales commission, say 5–10% of the cash collected from clients you brought in instead of getting a cash commission.
Okay.
Investors. You might get a finder's fee and slices for bringing in investment cash, maybe 5% on the first million, less after that. But the sources warn, check the legal side. You might need to be a registered broker, and usually you need to do more than just make an intro.
Right. Legal hoops, partners, vendors.
Less common for slices. Maybe a small slice bonus for landing a partnership that leads to significant measurable savings. But generally that's part of the job. Employee referrals? Sure. Maybe a small fixed slice bonus like $250 or $500 worth if the person you refer gets hired and stays a certain amount of time.
So it's always tied to a measurable result.
Pretty much. Value delivered. And there's always a catch-all other category for unique situations or agreed bonuses.
Okay, that's a lot on how slices earn the allocation. But people leave startups. What happens then? This is the recovery framework part.
Exactly. This is where the model deals with separation and where those multipliers really come into play to impose consequences based on why someone is leaving. There are 4 main scenarios the sources outline.
Let's tackle the difficult ones first. Termination for cause. Someone gets fired for doing something bad, stealing, harassment, just total non-performance.
Right. In that situation, the person leaving forfeits all their non-cash slices. Basically, the multiplier on their time and contributed ideas becomes zero. They do keep slices from cash they put in or tangible assets they provided, but those are recalculated at a 1x multiplier, no bonus multiple.
So they lose the risk premium.
Exactly. And the company can force them to sell those remaining 1x slices back to the company at the standard rate, usually $1 per slice. It's harsh, yes, but it protects the company from bad actors. And things like non-competes are usually fair game here.
Okay, what if someone just quits? Resignation for no good reason. They get a better job, win the lottery, decide they hate startups.
The consequences are actually the same as termination for cause. They lose the non-cash slices, 0x, keep the cash tangible slices at 1x, and the company can force a buyout at $1 slice. Non-compete usually applies too. The idea is, if you choose to leave the team in the lurch early on for your own reasons, you bear the cost.
Is there any flexibility there? Like if someone has to leave for financial reasons but wants to stay involved?
Yeah, the sources mention an optional loyal employee clause. You could potentially allow someone leaving for unavoidable personal reasons to keep some or all of their slices if they agree to continue contributing in a limited way, maybe part-time. But the default is they lose the non-cash equity.
Okay, so fault matters a lot. What if the company is at fault? Termination without cause. Layoffs, restructuring, maybe just a bad fit, but not poor performance.
Totally different outcome. If the company lets you go without cause, you keep all your slices, including the full multipliers. The company can offer to buy your slices at $1 slice, but you absolutely do not have to sell.
So the company carries the burden then.
Yes, they either have that dead equity on their books, or they have to pay potentially a significant amount to buy it back.
Yeah.
And importantly, the sources say a non-compete is not appropriate here. You can ask for non-solicitation, but not restrict their future work.
Makes sense. And the last one, resignation for good reason. You quit because the company did something bad, like changing the deal, or maybe death or disability.
Same as termination without cause. If you leave because the company fundamentally changed your role negatively, or maybe they tried to switch to slicing pie unfairly after promising a fixed split, or there are significant changes to the pie settings you didn't agree to, or, sadly, death or disability, you keep all your slices, full multipliers. Again, the company can offer to buy, but you don't have to sell. Non-solicitation okay, non-compete not okay.
So the model protects the individual when the separation isn't their fault.
Right. It holds the company accountable.
This $1 per slice buyout price, it's not meant to be the company's valuation at that moment, is it?
No, definitely not. That's a key point. It's just a pre-agreed, standardized rate within the model to handle buyouts, especially for those cash tangible contributions. It provides a simple mechanism. When slices are forfeited, like in a for-cause termination or bought out, they just disappear from the total pie.
Which increases everyone else's percentage.
Exactly. The remaining participants' shares automatically go up. It helps keep the cap table clean and aligns incentives that the committed folks benefit when someone leaves under certain circumstances.
Can active people sell their slices, like an on-the-job buyout?
Yep. The company can offer to buy slices from current active participants, again at that $1 slice rate. It gives the person some cash liquidity, but they give up the future potential upside of those slices. The sources suggest maybe doing it in installments, being careful it's not just someone cashing out before they quit.
And there's one more thing, a clawback.
Yeah, this is an interesting recommendation for fairness in those no-fault separations where the person keeps their slices. If the company offers a buyout at $1 slice and then turns around and sells the whole company for a much higher valuation within, say, a year, the source suggests considering a provision where the departed person might get some benefit from that higher sale price based on the slices they held. Definitely need to check the legality of that in your specific location, though.
Fascinating. Okay, so this dynamic system runs, slices accumulate, separations are handled. When does it stop? When does the pie freeze?
It stops being dynamic, and the percentages lock in when one of two major milestones is hit. Either the company reaches cash flow break-even.
Meaning it's paying all its bills, including salaries, from its own revenue.
Correct. Or the company raises a significant priced investment round, typically a Series A.
And why those points?
Well, at break-even, the fundamental risk dynamic changes. People are now getting paid their fair market value in cash. Their contributions aren't at risk in the same way anymore. The model's job is done. With a Series A, big external investors are coming in, putting significant cash at risk and setting a valuation. The financial risk shifts away from the founder's sweat equity and onto the investor's capital.
So at that point, the percentages calculated by slicing pie just lock in. It becomes a fixed cap table.
Precisely. Whatever the percentages are at the moment of freezing, that's the new fixed split going forward.
How does revenue before the freeze affect the slices?
Ah, good point. This is crucial. As the company starts generating revenue, it can use that cash to pay for ongoing expenses or to reimburse participants for their past or current contributions. When you use company cash to pay for something, whether it's salary or reimbursing an expense, you reduce the at-risk portion of that contribution.
So fewer slices get generated.
Exactly. If you pay 100% cash for someone's time that month, they get 0 slices for that time. If you reimburse an expense fully, 0 slices for that expense. The sources recommend using early revenue strategically. Maybe prioritize paying back contributions that generated slices at the 4x cash multiplier first, like well draws or unreimbursed expenses, because those are more expensive in slice terms.
Got it. And after the freeze, any profits, dividends, sale proceeds.
Distributed according to those final frozen percentages, just like a standard company structure at that point.
How do different kinds of funding fit in before the freeze?
Well, founder money often comes in as unreimbursed expenses, or maybe cash into the, generating slices as used.
Okay.
As we said, pooled cash from early backers. Slices generated for well owners when spent at 4x.
Right.
Personal loans, credit cards generate slices for the individual if they make the payments for the company, not if the company pays. Bank debt, usually a company liability, doesn't generate slices for individuals unless they've personally guaranteed it and the company defaults, forcing them to pay.
Yeah.
And venture capital, Series A and later.
VCs operate outside the slicing pie mechanics. They invest cash for shares in a priced round based on a negotiated valuation. They don't get slices, but having a clean slicing pie record makes their due diligence much easier. They can see exactly who contributed what and that the equity split was arrived at fairly.
Right, so slicing pie is really for that crucial, messy, high personal risk phase before the big money and formal valuations arrive.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The legal and tax side. Huge disclaimer here, right? Neither of us are lawyers or accountants.
Absolutely critical disclaimer. This is not legal or tax advice. You absolutely must consult qualified professionals in your specific city, state, country. Laws vary wildly.
The sources acknowledge that too. They say a single, simple, universal slicing pie contract is basically impossible because of all the different local laws.
Exactly. They recommend finding lawyers who actually understand the philosophy of slicing pie, who get what you're trying to achieve with fairness, and who are ideally sensitive to startup budgets. SLIICEpie.com apparently has resources to help find folks like that.
What are the key legal areas founders need to think about?
Several big ones. Employment law, biggie. Minimum wage laws might mean you have to pay people something, even if you're trying to do 100% equity. You can pay minimum wage, and the slices are calculated on the unpaid portion of their FMV. Employee versus contractor classification is huge too.
Yeah.
And non-compete clauses. Might be totally unenforceable where you are, especially after a no-fault separation. Tax law. Equity grants are almost always taxable events. When and how you issue shares can have major income tax implications for recipients and later capital gains implications. Issuing equity very early when the company value is technically 0 or very low might help, but it's complex. Your legal structure, C Corp, LLC, etc., massively impacts taxes too. The bottom line from the sources: figure out what you owe and pay it. Don't try to game the tax system, intellectual property. You need proper legal agreements to make sure any IP created actually belongs to the company, not the individual creator.
The sources also made a really interesting point about legal rights versus moral obligations in this system.
Yeah, that's key. Just because your contract legally allows something like maybe trying to enforce that non-compete after you fired someone without cause doesn't mean it aligns with the spirit of fairness in slicing pie. The model suggests that wouldn't be fair. Conversely, just because you want to be fair using slicing pie doesn't let you ignore legal obligations, like paying minimum wage if required.
So the goal is a contract that's legally solid for your location, but also embodies the fairness principles of the model as closely as possible.
That's the ideal, yeah. And one other quick point they made: control. Slicing pie tends to give more equity, potentially more voting control, to those who risk the most. That makes logical sense. But sometimes you might want a different operational control structure. That's a separate discussion, though. You shouldn't use control desires as an excuse for an unfair equity split.
Okay, super important nuances there. What if someone listening is already in a startup, they used a fixed split, and now things are tense, they're in that alligator pit, are they just stuck?
No, not necessarily. The sources specifically talk about how to retrofit slicing pie onto an existing company.
Retrofit. Sounds
Yeah.
hard. Going back in time to figure out everyone's contributions?
It is challenging, no doubt. You have to go back to day one and do your absolute best to reconstruct who contributed what all the time: cash, expenses, equipment use, everything. Perfect records probably don't exist, but the sources say just do your honest best. There are tools mentioned, like spreadsheets or the online pie slicer platform, that have features designed to help with this retrofitting process.
Can those tools also predict the future? Forecast splits.
They can be used for forecasting, yeah,
Mhm.
but the sources strongly advise against putting much faith in forecasts. Startups are just too unpredictable. The real power is in tracking actual contributions accurately going forward.
So the Pie Slicer online tool is key for actually running this day to day.
It seems designed for that, yeah. It lets everyone log their time, expenses, sales, whatever their contribution is. The system automatically does the calculations, applies the FMV, the multipliers, and shows the up-to-date pie chart reflecting the dynamic split. Seems like it makes the tracking much less painful.
I can imagine that retrofitting conversation might be awkward, especially if the slicing pie calculation shows someone's fair share is way less than their fixed split percentage.
Oh, absolutely. It can be very uncomfortable. Confronting, even,
Hmm.
particularly for anyone who is maybe unknowingly or not benefiting from an unfair fixed split.
Right.
But the sources frame it as a necessary step. It's about choosing fairness and long-term team health over sticking with a broken system. It's about getting out of the alligator pit for good.
So you do the retrofit calculation to get everyone's starting slice balance?
Right. And then you load those starting balances into the pie slicer tool or your spreadsheet, and from that day forward, you manage the equity dynamically based on ongoing contributions.
It makes a ton of sense logically, but people resist change. What are the pushbacks the sources expect? The common objections?
They anticipate quite a few and offer counterarguments.
Mm.
First, I just don't get it. It sounds complicated.
Yep.
The response is, yeah, it's a different way of thinking. But the core idea reward matches risk is simple. The mechanics are logical once you dive in. Resources like the book explain it clearly.
What about, I don't want to track everything, it's too much work. That seems like a big one.
Probably the biggest, yeah. The sources say, look, it takes discipline, but tools like Pie Slicer make it way easier. More importantly, tracking isn't just for equity. It's good business. It tells you where time and money are going. Investors want to see that kind of data. And fundamentally, if someone isn't willing to be transparent about their contribution, maybe they aren't the right partner anyway.
Fair point. What about someone could cheat the system, log fake hours?
The counter is that tracking involves what you did, not just hours logged. If someone logs tons of hours but produces nothing, that's a performance management issue, not a flaw in the equity model. Transparency actually makes it harder to game this system effectively.
Okay. How about productivity matters more than just hours worked?
The model accounts for this. Higher productivity expectations are reflected in a higher fair market value salary, which means more slices per hour worked. So the FMV sets the value rate, and the hours track the application of that value. Exceptional results can still be rewarded with bonuses or raises within the model's framework.
Gotcha. It's too complex. I want something simple, like 50-50.
The sources argue that fixed splits seem simple up front, but lead to incredibly complex, messy, and expensive problems later: the fights, the lawyers. Slicing pie handles the complexity of contributions systematically up front to avoid catastrophic complexity later. It's manageable complexity versus destructive complexity.
Right. My lawyer advisor doesn't like it.
Often, this is just unfamiliarity. The advice is educate them, share the book or website. If they're resistant to understanding a model designed for fairness in partnerships, maybe you need advisors who are more aligned with that goal.
Okay. Last one. There's too much uncertainty with a changing split.
They flip that completely. Fixed splits create massive uncertainty because you know they'll become unfair and force horrible, unpredictable renegotiations. Slicing pie provides certainty of fairness. You have a clear, agreed-upon system for how the split adjusts dynamically and fairly as things inevitably change.
That's a powerful reframing. It addresses the core fear behind sticking with the old way.
Yeah, it really challenges the notion that the simple, fixed way is actually simpler in the long run. It rarely is.
Okay, so let's wrap this deep dive. If you had to boil down the key takeaway from these sources about startup equity splits, what would it be?
For those early bootstrap stages, the traditional quick handshake fixed split is just loaded with risk. It's practically designed to create conflict. Slicing Pie presents a logical, fair, dynamic alternative that constantly aligns ownership with actual contribution and risk.
It feels like it's really about embedding fairness into the company's DNA from the start, a moral contract almost.
That's a great way to put it. It formalizes doing right by the people who are taking risks alongside you when cash is tight. The benefits are huge.
Mhm.
Avoiding those co-founder blowups, having clear records for investors, aligning everyone's incentives, and handling departures fairly.
And for anyone listening who wants to dig deeper, the sources offer a ton of support. Slicingpie.com, the Pie Slicer tool, the book itself, articles, workshops. It seems like a really well-developed system.
It really does. It's a comprehensive approach to solve a fundamental startup challenge.
So as you think about your own projects, maybe current ones, maybe past ones, here's something to reflect on. Given all the uncertainty baked into any startup journey, how much value do you truly place on building in fairness and transparency from day one? Is the illusion of simplicity offered by a fixed split really worth the high probability of conflict, stress, and potential failure down the road? And maybe more pointedly, what level of discipline, like tracking contributions, are you and your team willing to commit to in order to build a partnership where everyone genuinely feels they get what they deserve? That's worth some serious thought.